Father, we love you. We thank you. Lord Jesus, please come. Please be with us, mighty God. And please be with the ladies as they're preparing for the conference this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. We will jump in and go get running. We are picking up in Proverbs chapter 12. We're going to start right in the first verse, and we are going to run. We are going to try to keep pace with the Tuesday group. They got all the way into Proverbs chapter 14. However, again, and I know this is a little bit out of the ordinary, but if I run past a proverb and you're like, wait a minute, I'm not quite getting that, or there's a concept that you want to chop up some, please, this is the book for us to sit and to discuss, to sharpen one another as we go through it. But Proverbs chapter 12 is where we're going to get started. Verse 1 says this: He who loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates rebuke is stupid. Now, this is a great one for a parent, because a parent understands this as we see our kids. We understand that phase in life where they did something wrong. They know they did something wrong, and rather than own up to the thing they did wrong, what do? They try to hide. They try to hide the thing that they did. They try to hide themselves, because it's a mark of maturity to be able to take your lumps when you did something wrong. But it's a fool that hates that rebuke, and they are kept stupid because of it. But the one who loves discipline loves knowledge. And we will see this idea multiple times in chapter 15 as well. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 2, the good obtains favor from Yahweh, but anyone who schemes, that's referring to God will condemn. 12, verse 3, a person will not be established by wickedness, but the root of the righteous will not be moved. Now, we will see this idea of root a couple of times inside of these Proverbs. And it's important for us to understand, because we're going to have this difference in a house that's built by wickedness that appears great on the outside, but there's no foundation keeping it established. But then there is this root of the righteous, and the idea is of this thing that you can't even see. And you don't really know how strong that root is until you go to push on the tree or go to pull that plant, and you know how hard it is to move something like that is well rooted. If you try to establish yourself by wickedness, you have to constantly be on guard against wickedness, because you know how wicked people can be. And yet, if you just live honestly, you don't have to worry about it. You're not worried about the thing that's going to come and knock you off your perch. Verse 4. A woman of strength is the crown of her master, but like rot in his bones is she who brings shame. Now, again, in our handbooks we have here the LAB. The reason we use it is a couple of reasons. One, it's free. They let us print these out. But secondly, it's because they're trying to be extremely accurate to whatever the Hebrew is. And because of that, sometimes there is some clunkiness to the translation. Well, we have here this word that's translated in master in the LAB, husband in several other translations. The idea is one that she is bound to, but who has responsibility over her. Somebody who has to answer for her decisions. And if she's one of strength, she's a crown to her master. But if she's one who brings shame, she's like rot in his bones. Verse 5. The thoughts of the righteous are just. The advice of the wicked is treacherous. Now, here's one of those obvious things that we shouldn't even have to spend time on, but it's worth saying now. Jesus said that by their fruits you will know them, because you don't expect to find good fruit in a bad tree and bad fruit in a good tree. Makes sense. If you know someone's wicked, their advice is going to be treacherous. It doesn't matter how good it sounds on the front, they're going to be treacherous. Why? Because it's coming out of a place of wickedness. We'll see this idea multiple times in the Proverbs as well. So if you know they're wicked, just shut their advice out. But the thoughts of the righteous are just. Verse 6, the words of the wicked are an ambush of blood. Again, even what they say, even though it sounds good, it's going to lead up to this violence, and the violence is against the person who goes into the trap. But the mouth of the upright delivers them. This warning here is going to be repeated in verse 13 in a little bit, and it's going to be an ongoing repetition throughout the Proverbs that we're going to see today. The admonition, the begging of Solomon, guard what it is that you say. Don't feel the urge to have to speak everything that pops into your head. Verse 7, the wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous shall stand. It's tied to an earlier proverb we just discussed about the root of the righteous. Verse 8, for his mouth of good sense, a man will be recommended. Now, I like this. Okay, it's made clear by the second half of it. But a man who is of a perverse mind will be despised. Have you ever had a friend that you liked them, they were fun, but you were kind of embarrassed about taking them around other more civilized people because you never knew what was going to come out of their mouth? And so you kind of, they were your friend, but you didn't really want to hang out with other people with them. However, for a person who is of good sense, other people will sing your praises. They want to be associated with you. When there's a problem, hey, go ask Jim, go ask Jane, because they have good sound advice to give you. They're a person of wisdom. And if you speak words of wisdom, others will sing your praises. But if all your words are crass and perverse, no one wants to admit that they're with you. Verse 9. Here's another, a little bit clunky in the LED. It is better to be lowly and a servant to someone than self-glorifying and lacking food. Now, when you look at other translations, it'll say it's better to live humbly or something like that, to be lowly, but to have a servant. That seems to be the more accurate translation as far as understanding what it is that Solomon was writing. But the idea is this. It's better not to put on airs and pretend to be what you're not. It's better to be humble. Have somebody working for you than to be self-glorifying and you can't even afford food. We'll see this again later. Verse 10, the righteous knows or regards, they consider, they know it all the way through. The righteous knows the life of his animal, but the compassion of the wicked is cruel. Now, this is one of those things that the righteous do. I remember reading this article that Spurgeon wrote about, and during that time in London, they just so happened to have this shocking event. They're still pulling around carts with horses at the time, and there was a horse pulling a load so heavy, being driven so hard, and being whipped so much that eventually the strain of the horse pulling at that cart caused the horseshoes to rip from the bottom of his hooves and leave trails of bloody hoof prints through the city. And it was one of those things that shocked even the very busy people in London because it was so obviously cruel. And so what we have here is the righteous understands that whatever comes under your umbrella, you're responsible for. Care for them. Doesn't matter if they're an animal or if they're a person, take care of them. But what we see contrasted to that is the compassion of the wicked. Even when they look to show compassion, even that is cruel. Verse 11, he who works his land will have plenty of food, but he who follows worthless things lacks sense. It's one of those areas that we run into what we talked about last time. What are the 3 rules for financial success or wealth within the book of Proverbs? Solomon lays it out. It's work hard, avoid foolish debt, live a life pleasing to God. That's it. That's the 3 rules. Work hard, avoid foolish debt, live a life pleasing to God. Here we come back to the same idea. He says, but he who follows worthless things lacks sense. Just work what it is that God has given you. Trust that he will give you the plenty that you need. But if you follow worthless things, eventually you're going to find that you just don't have anything at all. The person who follows worthless things lacks sense. Avoid frivolous spending. Verse 12. The wicked covets the proceeds of evil, but the root of the righteous bears fruit. This is one of those things that we have to be aware of. You have to plug it deep inside your head. And even though you're going to struggle, it's what we saw in the Psalms. Do not envy the riches of the wicked. Do not envy their share. Whatever your portion is, that's what we're going to see in Proverbs chapter 30. Whatever the portion God has for you, be satisfied with that. Because that's what we're going to see in Proverbs 30, where he says, don't give me so much that I become proud and forget you. Don't give me so little that I'm tempted to steal. Just whatever my portion is, give me that and help me to be satisfied with it. Now, starting in the next one, verse 13, all the way through verse 20, we will have this section dealing with rash, foolish, or deceitful speech. And this is going to be a big theme within chapter 12. But starting here in verse 13, we're going to see this repeated. Now, it's not all the verses, but it's here and there. He keeps coming back to it. So, chapter 12, starting in verse 13. But the transgression of lips, evil is ensnared. By the transgression of lips, evil is ensnared, but the righteous escapes from trouble. Now, I mentioned in verse 6 that we're going to see this warning again later. As the evil keep talking, eventually their words are going to trap them. In verse 6, it says what? It's an ambush of blood. But now in verse 13, we find out the one stuck in the trap is the wicked person. But the righteous escapes from trouble. If you just keep telling the truth, you have nothing to worry about. The Lord's justice will be done. The wicked say things that get them into trouble, though. Verse 14, From the fruit of the mouth of a man, he is filled with good, and the reward of a man's labor will return to him. Now, verse 14 presupposes that the person is being righteous, but we see this idea. What comes out of your mouth will be visited back upon you. Not in some way that your words have power and they attract things. That's not the idea. But what's coming out of your mouth is what is inside of your heart and the way that you're living. As you live as unto the Lord, you're being filled with good, and your labor will be rewarded if you keep working righteously. Verse 15. The way of a fool is upright in his own eyes. We need big arrows here. We need circles, because this is an important one. We can justify anything to ourselves. What we do always makes sense to us. If it didn't make sense to us, we wouldn't do it. So we always think that our stuff is the best. Nobody can tell us anything. But this is the mark of a fool, because what? The one who listens to advice is wise. If you think what you're doing is right and nobody else does, you need to ask some questions. You need to wonder about what it is that you're doing. And remember this, even the fool thinks what he's doing is right. But the one who listens to advice, which implies the fool will not listen. And this is one of the most important lessons that we as Christians need to understand. If someone won't receive, stop wasting your breath. Because you can't tell them anything. You cannot tell a fool anything, because even the fool thinks what they're doing is right. Verse 16, but as for a fool, right? As for a fool, on that very day, he makes his anger known. So we have this ongoing idea. You can't tell anything to the fool. The fool always thinks he's right. And then the next verse, we see these demonstrations of it. On the very day that he's offended, that he's upset, he's going to let everybody know about it. But he who ignores an insult is prudent. Again, we have this idea of the mark of maturity is being able to control your tongue. A little kid has the tantrum immediately. As soon as the little baby starts to get upset, you take its whatever from it, they let you know. This is the idea. The fool on that very day, that very moment, they can't keep it down for a second, but can you ignore the insult? Can you hold yourself and be in control? Remember this idea, we'll see it again. Verse 17, he who will speak truth will reveal righteousness, but the witness of falsehood, deceit. What comes out of your mouth tells you a lot about what that person is. But again, if they're a wicked person, if they're lying, that's all the words you're going to get. You need to separate yourself from them. Verse 18, there is one who speaks rashly like the thrust of a sword. Now, this is a really good one. And it's one of the areas that we as Christians, again, need to really be on guard for. And I'm saying really a lot. I'll try to do better. We need to be on guard for, because one of the things you learn when you learn the truth of the Bible is that you almost seem to have an answer to everything. And we forget that the Bible needs to be treated like sharper than any two-edged sword, able to split through the muscle and the bone, right? But some people go and they take all these truths in the Bible and they proceed to use it like a hammer. And if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's what they do. They speak rashly, without thought, without consideration for the one that they're pouring into. And so now it becomes like this thrust of a sword, and nobody wants to hear what you have to say next. But the tongue of the wise person brings healing. And that effect that you have in the life of the person you're pouring into, that tells you whether you're being wise or you're being foolish. It doesn't mean that you don't say hard truths. Sometimes you have to. But this is very similar to what Paul teaches about the true nature of prophecy in 1 Corinthians 14. In 1 Corinthians 14, he says, all prophecy must do three things. All. In order for it to be prophecy, it has to qualify for this. It has to edify, that means to build something up. It has to exhort, which means to instruct you, to charge you with what to do. And it must comfort or console the listener, bring healing. In my head, I remember it this way. It has to edify you, it has to exhort you, and it has to encourage you. It has to build you up, it has to tell you what to do, and it has to comfort your soul. If it does those three things, then it falls into this category. But if it does not, if it does two of the three, it's not prophecy. And this is the responsibility that we have. We must pour out these words with the heart of being able to bring healing to the one who's hurt. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't say hard things. Truth is hard. It separates, it offends. That's what truth sometimes does. But why are you saying these words? What is the heart that you have? Is it to beat somebody down because all you have is a hammer, or is it because I think this word will go right to where you are, and I believe this is what God has put on my heart? Verse 19. A lip of truth endures forever, but a tongue of deception lasts only a moment. Verse 20. Deceit is in the heart of those who plan evil, but to those who plan peace, there is joy. Verse 21. No evil will happen to the righteous, and immediately I start to have questions, but the wicked are filled with trouble. Now, where it says no evil will happen to the righteous, or maybe it may say befalls in your translation, depends on the translation you have. It's an accurate translation, but it's a little bit tough because it's one of the meanings this particular Hebrew word can mean. But there's another word meaning to this Hebrew word that's probably a little bit better. A little clunky, you got to nuance it a bit, but this is what it means. The idea is of searching something out desperately. And the word picture, and this is one of the really neat things about the Hebrew, is that it has these word pictures associated with the letters themselves. The idea is of a ship in the middle of a sea that's searching for the distant shore. And it's desperately trying to find it. So it's pushing and it's pushing and it's pushing, trying to find it, just searching for that distant shore where it can be safe. The idea here is that the righteous, they are not looking for that evil. They are not seeking it out. Doesn't mean that they won't have times of difficulty. Jesus tells us that there will be tribulation in this life. However, the wicked are filled with trouble. Why? Because that's what they're looking for. They're searching for it. The righteous are not searching for it. So which one is going to be filled up to the tippy top? It's going to be the wicked, because that's what it is that they want. Verse 22. An abomination of Yahweh. And as soon as we see that phrase, we need to circle it in red and have arrows, because we need to make sure that whatever this is, it does not define us. An abomination of Yahweh are the lips of deceit, but they who act faithfully are his delight. If verse 12 and 13 were not enough, now we have this verse that urges us to guard our words and guard our lives. Not only are we not to have lips of deceit, that's the negative, we are to act faithfully in order to be his delight. Verse 23. A clever person conceals knowledge. Now, the idea is not that you hide it. The idea is that you don't blab everything that you know. You don't always have to be the smartest person in the room. And you know what these people are like? As soon as you start to say something, whatever you're about to say, they know better, they've been through worse, they've been through greater, they've done it better than you, and on and on and on. And you can't say anything without them telling you about how much better their life is than yours. A clever person conceals knowledge, but what does the heart of a fool do? It announces folly. So here's the joke. Want to know what a fool thinks? Just wait. They'll tell you. They almost can't seem to keep it in. Why? Because it's a mark of maturity to be able to control your tongue. This is confirmed in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 14. Again, Solomon writing, he says this, yet the fool multiplies words. Proverbs 15:2, the mouth of fools spouts folly. It's like a spring that just won't stop. The more vocally opinionated someone is, the more likely they're a fool. You know somebody who can't stop talking on Facebook? That whatever comes up, they have this long soliloquy. I'm like, did you have this saved? How did you get this out so fast? Some people are just like that. But a wise person keeps their thoughts to themselves. If you don't have to ask someone their opinion, you just wait and they'll tell it to you. You don't have to wonder what they are. Yeah, I like this a lot. You say, like, well, Anthony's always talking. I have to. This is part of the gig, okay? It's part of the calling. It'd be real odd if I just stood up here and let regular Anthony not say anything. But if Anthony wasn't a pastor, I promise you would not hear my voice. But I don't, when I'm talking to people or I'm in a group, I never feel the need to try to be the master teacher that knows all the answers in the room. Even if I think what you're saying is not exactly 100% correct, let it go. Let it go. Let's just hear. And the reason I do that is because I already know what I know. I don't need to know what I know. I know what I know. I want to know what you know. Because then I know how to interact with you. I know, are you the expert? I need to learn from you. Maybe you're not the expert, but you're going to tell me something I'm going to need to remember in order to be better about my life. We don't have to have all the answers. It is so much better, I promise you, it is so much better to come in the room and get to be the one who is fed rather than the one responsible for the meal. Because you know all the pressure is if you're the one hosting and you have to come up with the meal. And everything has to be just right, and you're looking at everyone's expression. Did I mess anything up? Is anything not good? As opposed to just being able to come in there, eat, compliments to the chef, and leave without doing the dishes. Man, that's an easier life. So don't rush to have to be the one that knows everything in the room. Sometimes it's good to just listen. Verse 24. The hand of the diligent ones will rule, but the lazy will belong to forced labor. In my Bible, I have this next to this in the margin. Hard work works. There is absolutely no replacement for it. If you could only teach one thing to the next generation outside of Jesus, it's this. Hard work works. Just work hard. I promise you, if you just learn to work hard, almost every employer will go to the ends of the earth to give you every possible chance to stick around. Because that work ethic is something that you just can't teach. You can't give it to them on the job. You almost either have it or you don't. But the lazy here belong to forced labor. And they belong to forced labor because eventually they're in such a bad condition, they have so much debt that they're forced to work in order to pay off their debts. So when we're talking with the boys and we're raising them up, and you can ask them this, and they'll both tell you, is being lazy more work or less work? And they'll go, it's always more work. Because now not only did you halfway do the job before, now you're going to have to sit here as I chew you out and explain to you why you did it bad, and you have to do it all over again. So at the very bare minimum, you did 50% more than you had to do. As opposed to just doing it right the first time. Just wherever you are, be there. Just get it done. Because when you get done, you can be done. But if you don't be done, or if you don't get done, you can't be done. We're going to keep doing this. Hard work works. Lazy is so much more work. Just do what you're asked to do the first time. Verse 25. Anxiety in the heart of a man will weigh him down, but a good word will cheer him up. It's one of those moments, sense the tone. Somebody's hurting, they're overwhelmed, their life is difficult, they're dealing with anxiety. The last thing they really need is for you to come up and give them a good old stiff upper lip, get moving, and here's a swift kick in the pants. No. Sometimes they just need a good word to cheer them up because the anxiety is weighing their heart down. Speak a pleasant word into the heart of the anxious. What did we see before? The words of the wise bring healing. Sometimes they don't need a sharp sword. Verse 26. A righteous person will seek out his neighbor, but the way of the wicked will lead astray. Now again, the LEB's tiny bit clunky here, but the second part of the verse clarifies the first part. The second part says the way of the wicked will lead them astray. So the way that I'm leading you, if I'm wicked, is going to lead you off the path and into danger. The other idea in the first part then becomes the righteous person seeks out the neighbor that is astray and brings them back to a place of safety. The wicked leads you astray and off the path. The righteous goes and finds you when you are astray and brings you back to the path. And that's the way that one goes. Verse 27. The lazy will not roast his game. I love the way Solomon talks about the lazy. It just cracks me up. But this image is a great one, right? They do all the work of going to catch the game. They go hunting or they go fishing or whatever it is. They get it all the way back to house, all the way back to camp, and now they're ready to eat, but they're just not willing to cook it. That's the part that's too much work. So they sit there and go hungry while everything spoils. In my head, I have this idea of a person that goes out and spends like a couple of hours going to buy groceries, and you spend all of this money, and you load up the car, and you get all the way home, and you put them all the way into the kitchen, and then you're like, all right, I'm done. And you won't put the stuff in the fridge, and they spoil on the floor. And it's like you went through all that other work, and now here at the end, you're not willing to cross the finish line. But diligence is the precious wealth of man. This word, the Hebrew word for diligent, is so incredibly meaningful. It has all these meanings, like diligent, but it means sharp, to make a decision, to dig a mote in gold. And in this idea is all these activities, all these ideas, all at once. The diligence, the movement, the activity, the labor even of it. But what you end up with something more valuable than gold. It is the exhortation for us from Galatians 6:9. Let us not grow weary while doing good. For in due season, if we just hang on, we will reap if we do not lose heart. Verse 28. On the road of righteousness is life, and on the way of the path may there be no death. All right, chapter 13. Now, here in the first verse, we have a symmetry in chapter 12, verse 1. Chapter 12, verse 1 was what? About that person who's going to be foolish and try to hide even though they know they're in trouble. So they're avoiding rebuke and they end up stupid because of it. Here in verse 1, a wise child Now, in the other one, the bad child hides. But here, the wise child hears the discipline of a father. But what does a scoffer do? A scoffer does not listen to a rebuke. We've seen fools. We've seen the wicked. Now we're starting to see the scoffer. The scoffer is going to be important as we continue forward, because the idea of a scoffer is they're not willing to listen to what you have to say because they have their answer already. So this falls into the camp of a fool, right? Because a fool is already justified in their own mind. A scoffer mocks everything that you tell them. Verse 12, from the fruit of the mouth of a man he shall eat what is good, but the desire of the treacherous wrongdoing. Again, we've seen this before. What it is that you're desiring, what it is that you have placed within your heart, that is what's going to fill you up. Verse 3, he who keeps his mouth guards his life. Again, this idea. Watch your words. Don't just say everything that pops into your head, because he who opens his lips, ruin belongs to him. I can't say it enough. It is a mark of maturity to be able to control your speech. And if you struggle, beg the Lord for wisdom and control. And he even tells us the prayer to say, Psalm 141:3, set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Remember, if we're going to be the wise, then we should have words that bring healing. 1 Corinthians 14, words that edify, that exhort, and encourage. All right, from this point on in chapter 13, we're going to have the scattering of verses about wealth and proper resource management. Now, I would love to tell you as we go through these almost random proverbs that I'm the one that's figured out whatever the system is that Solomon was thinking about. He's doing 2 of this one, then 1 of this one, and then 3 of that one, and he's got this pattern. I do not know. It's one of the many questions I have for the Lord about why didn't you just group the stuff together? Why isn't there just a chapter on the fool, and then a chapter on the tongue, and then a chapter on money? It'd make it so much easier for me to teach. But this is the way he's done it. It's scattered about, so as you're going through it, it's almost like you're taking a walk with a parent, and as they go along the path, as they see different things, they teach you what pops into their head. So verse 4, the soul of the lazy craves, but there is nothing. Now, there's so much inside of that first section. The soul of the lazy person wants lots of stuff, but they're not willing to work for it. It's one of the interesting thoughts that years and years ago I read Zell Miller's book. If you remember, he's deep in Georgia history. An amazing man. Had a chance to meet him. But he writes in his book about how his mother built their house by going down to a river and picking out stones out of the river and bringing them up. And every once in a while, some of the guys from the church would come and help her, but oftentimes it was just her, by herself, no dad, going down to the river, getting stones, using them to build her house. And when that house was finally done, the lesson that Zell took from that was this: you can have anything you desire as long as you're willing to work. If you're willing to work for it, just that one thing all by itself, that God will bless that kind of heart. The soul of the lazy craves, but there's nothing, but the person of diligence is richly supplied. Verse 5, the righteous hates a word of falsehood. The wicked will bring shame and disgrace. Verse 6, righteousness will guard the upright of way. So the person walking in the way of God, the righteous. But wickedness will overthrow sin, or the sinner in the New American Standard. The idea is that if you go and you do wickedness, it's going to overthrow you if you filled yourself up with sin. Verse 7. We already saw this in chapter 12, verse 9, but here we go again. There is one who acts rich but has nothing. Now, this just bothers me in the social media age. Now, I remember guys like this in high school. You know, I went to high school in the 90s, so people would go and they'd get cars they couldn't afford, and they would do dumb stuff, and they'd put loud stereos in it and stuff like that. They would go and get cell phones. This is when mobile cell phones first came out, so you had the little bag, and you had to put the antenna on top of your car and the whole 9 thing. And I remember one guy who actually was dumb enough to use it, and his phone bill and the charges, he could stand on top of his bed in his room when we were in high school, right? So he stands on his bed, he lifts the thing, and the bill hits the ground and keeps rolling. It was something like $3,000 in $1990. I mean, we were like, you will never pay this off in your life. It was like, what was the point of getting the phone? Much less using it, because he wanted people to see him using it, because he was the only guy who had it. And he's also the only guy that had to worry about declaring bankruptcy at like 16 years old. Why act rich and have nothing? But there's another who pretends to be poor. They live so humbly. They've been driving the same car for the next 27 years, and yet they have wealth. This is such good counsel in the social media age. Beware the showboat who flaunts their life. As Shakespeare wrote, all that glitters is not gold. And never follow the example of someone who tries so hard to broadcast an image of success. If you have to do that much to send that image, what is going on? But here's the thing for Christians as well. This applies to holiness and godliness as well. Do not trust the peacock. Look for the humble dove. Because the more a person has to tell you about how holy they are and how great everything's going and how awesome their walk with God is, you got to wonder. You got to wonder. Because the longer you walk with God, the more humble you become. Verse 8, the ransom of a life of a man is his wealth. Now, this is an observation. The observation is that if you have lots of money, you can leverage that to get you out of sticky situations. That's the first observation. But then Solomon goes this. I notice this as well. But the poor does not receive a threat. Nobody's coming after the poor guy to try to swindle them out of their money. It's like you don't have anything. If I steal from you, we're just going to be stealing from each other because both of us are broke. So who do you go after? You go after the one that seems to have something, the person that has wealth. So as the saying goes, more money, more problems. Yes, you can use it to leverage and all these great things, but now you have to worry about all of these additional things. Instead, just be satisfied with your portion, whatever it might be. Verse 9. The light of the righteous will rejoice, but the lamp of the wicked will die out. This is one of those promises from the Lord. Solomon is telling us, using all the wisdom that he has, this is what's going to happen. Verse 10, only by insolence. It's a great word. Okay, only by insolence is strife set up. The idea of insolence is not just pride or haughtiness. It's when that inner pride or haughtiness now comes to the outside in the form of contemptuous, overbearing behavior to other people. If you're just prideful on the inside with your nose stuck in there, that's one thing. But when you use that idea that you're better than other people and now use it to press them down, it becomes insolence. That is the danger. It sets up strife. Everything becomes an argument. It's a person who refuses to treat others well. They treat them with contempt. They will not take advice, which is the other half of the proverb. And wisdom is with those who take advice. So because I'm so proud that I'm going to oppress others, I can't receive anything. I can't be told anything. But contrary to that person, we are to love knowledge. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 1. Listen to counsel. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 15. But all of that to say this. This is what this proverb tells us. Be teachable. Be teachable. Be willing to receive. None of us have it all figured out. None of us have all the answers yet. Verse 11. Wealth gained from haste will dwindle, but he who gathers little by little will increase it. Beware fast money. Fast money is easily lost. Now, what happens if you go and you get this little spoiled kid, you just give them a lot of money? What's going to happen? They're going to go and just blow it and spend it every which way they can. But if you take that same kid and you have that same amount of money, but you make them work for it, and they have to put in labor for it, and they got some skin in the game, all of a sudden you see that same amount of money takes so much longer, if ever, to all be spent. Why? Because they understand the value of it now. If it's just dropped in your lap, you're not going to value it. So that's why there is this long history of lotto winners that they get it, and then in 2 or 3 years, they're worse off than they were before. Why? Because it didn't take you anything to gain it. You don't have the appreciation for it within your heart. Inheritance gained hurriedly at the beginning will not be blessed in the end. That's what we'll learn in chapter 20. Here we see it. Don't seek to gain it in haste. Oh, if I had all this money now, things would be better. No. It is so much better to gain it little by little. Chapter 12. Hope that is deferred makes the heart sick. This is a very poignant proverb, but it's also super sad. Or the idea is that I have a hope, but it doesn't come right now. I have to wait for it. It's going to come someday in the sweet by and by. It's kind of what we see with John and Martha. But what we'll really see this one is in Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 8, the prophet encourages Israel to fear the Lord and to wait on him, even though it feels like the Lord is hiding his face. He promised us that one day he's going to bring us back to the promised land. It just doesn't feel like it's happening today. It feels like he's still mad at us. But continue to hope in him. And they're trying to hope in him, but it makes their heart sick. But a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. In Isaiah 25, Isaiah is going to describe how we will rejoice when at last the Jews and the Gentiles who are in Christ all finally see what it is that Jesus has done. when we at last see what we have long desired, when Jesus swallows up death forever, and when he wipes away every tear, when we at last have that hope we've been praying for all this time, and in that day, he says we will say this, behold, this is our God, for whom we have waited, that he might save us. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us rejoice and be glad. Verse 13. He who despises the word will bring destruction on himself. Again, this is the person who refuses advice, refuses a word of wisdom. But he who respects a commandment will be rewarded. Verse 14. The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life, in order to avoid the snares of death. Verse 15. Good sense grants favor. I love this one. You may have heard it this way. Good understanding produces favor. But it goes to something we went before. If you speak words of wisdom, others will sing your praises. They will recommend you to others. Because you have good understanding, it produces favor in the hearts of others. But the way of the faithless is coarse. Verse 16. Anyone who is clever will act with intelligence, but the fool will display folly. Why did God give us a brain? So we could use it. Smart people act smart. Smart people act smart. And it's one of those things I got to go with my boys. I go, boys, you guys are smarter than me, but you just don't use your brains. And then they look at me and go, but Dad, we would use our brains if we want to. And I'm like, that's not a good response. He gave you brains for a reason. The smart act smart. But it's what Jesus teaches us in Luke chapter 7. He says, wisdom is vindicated, is proved by all her children. Wisdom is shown to be wisdom by what comes out of it. The smart are shown to be smart when they act smart, when they use their brain. Verse 17. A messenger of wickedness will fall into trouble, but an envoy of the faithful brings healing. Again, here's this idea. It's coming out of what comes out of our heart. But if you are sent by the wicked for wicked purposes, God is going to see it undone. Even if it seems like you have initial success, eventually it will be undone. We see this in the history of Israel. But for the envoy of the faithful, that one is going to bring healing. Even if we don't think they accomplish what we want them to do, God says, I will bring healing out of it. My plan is still best. Verse 18. Poverty and disgrace belongs to him who ignores instruction. Ongoing, we hear this. Don't refuse sound wisdom. Don't refuse sound advice. But he who guards reproof, the one who takes being corrected well, that one will be honored. Verse 19. A desire fulfilled will be sweet to the soul, but the abomination of fools is turning from evil. Now, this is a neat one. We saw this before, right? What comes out of your mouth, that shows what's in your heart, and that will be revisited back upon you. God will feed you the fruit that comes out of the abundance of your heart. What we have here is a desire fulfilled. What it is that you're wanting will be sweet to you, which is why for fools, it's an abomination. They detest it. It's hard for them to turn away from evil because it's what they desire. It is painful for a fool to leave his folly. He wants to stay in it. And you can't tell him anything. Why? Because even a fool can justify what they're doing to themselves. Verse 20. Walk with the wise and be wise. But as for the companion of fools, he will suffer harm. Here's the saying. Show me your companions, and I will tell you your future. The people that we surround ourselves with, they become our counselors. They breathe into our lives. This affects us in so many ways. So surround yourself with people smarter than you. There is nothing wrong with being the dumbest person in the group if the group pours into you and helps lift you up. Verse 21. Misfortune will pursue sinners, but the righteous will be rewarded with prosperity. Verse 22. He who is good will leave an inheritance to his grandchildren, and stored up for the righteous is the wealth of a sinner. Let me attack this one backwards. What we're told here is that as the wicked and the sinners, they go and they accumulate, which is why we're told, don't envy the riches of the wicked. Because what I'm going to do as the Lord, I'm going to take whatever it is that they've accumulated in themselves, and I'm going to turn this back to the righteous. Somehow or another, he'll make that happen. We see this in Egypt, right? When the Israel leaves, they end up plundering the Egyptians, and they come out so much richer than they went in. And we'll see this idea in other places as well with Cyrus. But what we have here is the understanding that this is the way it's going to be. But then he starts with this. The good parent is the one who leaves an inheritance to his grandkids. And the idea is not that they make so much money that their kids can't blow it all themselves and they leave some for the grandkids. That's not the idea. The idea is that the parents have done such a good job teaching their kids how to be financially and fiscally responsible that they don't have to rely on the inheritance from the parents just to survive. It's a gift. It helps them. It helps them up. But the idea is not like, well, I can just act a fool and eventually mom and dad will give me lots of money and I'll live off of that. The idea is that I will be such a good steward. I've been taught. I've been brought up properly. So now I can turn around and pour this blessing into the generation that's coming up. It's why the saying is so true. Parents, if you want to know if what you're teaching is taking root, don't look at your kids, look at your grandkids. Because what it is that your kids teach their kids are the lessons that you have passed on. Verse 23. There is much food in the field of the poor. Now just think about that phrase for a second. What Solomon is talking about here is the potential inside of the field that even the poor have. But you're like, wait, they're poor. They're landowners, so why are they poor? Then comes the second part. But it is swept away by injustice. The idea is that they're poor not because they don't have access to resources, not that they couldn't do something if only they were given a chance, but they spend all of their energy fighting against injustice. They don't have enough time to just work their field. So instead, the land just lies fallow. There's nothing going on there. They can't be seeded. It can't be sowed. There is injustice. The powerful are trying to prevent the poor from gaining access to their land or even seeding and reaping the potential that's there. They end up damaging the land in the process. Verse 24. He who withholds his rod hates his child. This is one of the verses my kids do not like when I start to quote. And they're like, oh, well, Dad, that's Old Testament. I'm like, no, this is Old Testament house. We're going back to this. But here's the idea. Because later on, we're going to find out that the rod for a fool is in their mouth. The words that they speak is going to eventually lead to their own discipline. This verse right here is the only time you're going to get discipline where the hand that delivers loves you. That there's grace and mercy in whatever this discipline is. Because if you go and act a fool and you go before the world, they will have no mercy or grace for you. They don't want to see you come out of it better than you went in. Their only desire is for you to stop. My desire is for you to grow. He who withholds his rod spanks his child, or hates his child, but he who loves him gives him discipline. In the margin, spank your kid. Verse 25. The righteous eats to satisfy his life, but the belly of the wicked will lack. The idea of that, the belly of the wicked will lack, is not that they have nothing to eat. The idea is nothing is ever enough. The righteous is satisfied with their portion. We understand that however long we're here, or 70 as it were, whatever that distance is, it is only for a moment. We have all of eternity to be with the King. So I'm here to do my Father's will. But the wicked never have enough. They keep looking and looking for more. We need to be like Proverbs chapter 30, verse 8. Satisfy me with my portion. Don't give me more than my share. Chapter 14. We're not going to get all the way through this chapter, but we're going to try to go just a little bit deeper here. All right, verse 1. The wisest of women builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with her hands. It is interesting that Solomon puts this one through the lens of the female, not the dad. It is the mom who has the greatest potential to build a house up or to tear it down. Her being the conduit of unconditional love inside of that house. What she does with the kids, what she does with her husband. She has the most influence there. And she can tear this down as a foolish person by both degrading, so that's criticism and abuse, but also by allowing questionable stones, compromised stones, to build up that house. Because even though it's getting tall, it may be on such a rocky foundation, it will take nothing at all to tear it down. Verse 2. He who walks in uprightness fears Yahweh, but he who is devious in his ways displeases him. Being sneaky and fearing the Lord do not go hand in hand. You cannot do both. Verse 3, in the mouth of a fool is the rod of pride. Now, this idea of a rod of pride is not that it's unbreakable, you can't break it. The idea is that the thing coming out of your mouth is going to be used to whoop you, is what we talked about already. Right? This is why, as parents, Do not spare the rod. Discipline your child. Help them grow up. In the mouth of a fool is the rod of pride. It's the corrective device for them, but the lips of the wise preserve them. The wise person understands discretion protects you. Guard the words of your mouth. Verse 4. Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty. This one really, really hits me close to home. Because every time I read it now, ever since COVID, I cannot stop thinking about that period of time when all the kids who used to call this church home were just gone. And it was so empty in this building. You could feel it. Okay, true. All right, you didn't have to worry about all the noise. You didn't have to tell little kids to stop screaming. You didn't have to worry about them running across and you running into one of them and knocking them down. You didn't have to yell at kids not to play on the stairs. Come on, stop doing it. Stop rolling each other down. But there was also an understanding. There was a lack of something. And it's true. Where there are no kids, there is no mess, and there's also no future. Yeah, maybe the manger's clean. Nobody has to clean it out because we don't have any ox. But now you have no strength. How are you going to do? How are you going to live? How are you going to make it to the next day? But understand that a messy manger means that you have ox, but the abundance of crops comes by the strength of an ox. That plenty that the Lord wants to bring into you. It's going to come with a little mess. But better some mess and some kids than no mess and no kids. Verse 5. A faithful witness does not lie, but he who breathes out falsehood is a witness of deceit. Verse 6. A scoffer seeks wisdom, but there is none. But knowledge comes easily to him who understands. Now, why can't the scoffer find wisdom? Because it says they're seeking wisdom, right? But they're a scoffer. That means that anything you bring to them, they're going to make fun of. They're going to mock it. So nothing appears wise to the scoffer. They always have some little comment, some part of them that goes, well, you can't tell them nothing. Proverbs 12:15, the way of a fool is upright in his own eyes. And because of that, they mock anything that you have to say. Don't argue with them. Again, you can't convince them that they're wrong. That's God's job. What are we supposed to do? Proverbs 22:10, drive the scoffer out. Do that, and contentions will cease. Proverbs 14:7, leave the presence of a foolish man, for you will not come to know words of knowledge. Now, here's an interesting one. Okay, again, this is, I heard this because my kids are much better than I was at this age, right? So I would hang around with fools. And foolish kids doing foolish things when nobody was using our brains was not a good recipe for anything. And one of those things you learn is that when you surround yourself with fools, it only dulls your discernment no matter how wise you might be, how smart you might be. But if you understand that iron sharpens iron, that when you're with other folks who are sharp, other folks that are righteous, other folks who just use their brain, then it brightens your ability to understand what you're being told. Leave the presence of a foolish man. Don't surround yourself with fools, because as you do, the dumber you'll get. Verse 8, the wisdom of the clever is understanding his ways. Now, the idea is that you understand what it is, you understand the reasons behind what it is that you're doing. Okay, again, parents, right, I keep coming back to it, but it's so useful. You go and you ask a little kid, why did you do this? And what do they say? I don't know. Like, come on, man, I need something to work with. Why did you do the thing that you did? But if you don't even understand your ways, why it is that you've done, how can I possibly help you through this? It's the folly of fools, it's deceit. They think whatever they're doing may be for the right reasons, or they've justified it in their own heads, or worse yet, they don't even know. But if you start to understand the reasons why you do what you do, then you're on this path of being clever, of being able to understand wisdom. It gives you such a leg up on life. Verse 9, fools mock the guilt offering. Now, the idea here is that they don't think they need a guilt offering. They mock its importance, that it needs to be there at all. Because for them, sin is nothing. What do I need a guilt offering for? I'm not as bad as this person or that person, or, well, there is no real God, so why not just have a fun time here? They mock the guilt offering. For them, it's absolutely nothing. But among the upright, among those who love the Lord or who desire to be righteous, it is favorable. It is a very good thing. Verse 10, the heart knows the bitterness of its soul. Now, stop right there. The heart knows its own pain. The heart knows its own pain. John Gill puts it this way: the heart of man only knows the whole of it. Only that person knows the whole of their pain. You might be able to guess certain things by how they are on the outside, their mannerisms, their facial expressions. You can know bits and pieces of what they're going through, but not all of it. So beware ever telling anybody, I totally understand what you're going through. I fully understand your pain. Even if your pain is similar, your situations are similar, everyone responds differently, and they will reject your counsel if you claim to understand what they are going through. It is one of the biggest hurdles in all of counseling. It's one of the things that I have to be careful of on my own, but especially as I'm counseling someone on how to counsel. You have to tell them, do not dominate the conversation. Don't spend all your time with them telling them what you have gone through. Your counseling session is not my therapy session. It's not there for me to pour out words to feel better about me. It's not the time for me to tell you what I went through. It's the time for me as the counselor to hear your stories and to show you that all the answers are only found in his story. To take your eyes and put them back to Christ. To show you only he has the answers to the problems that you're going through. And you have to earn the right to even do that. Because now comes the second part of the proverb. The heart knows its own, the bitterness of its soul. But in its joy, even when times are good, it will not share itself with a stranger. If the heart won't just show you everything when it's good times and it's feeling good, how much less will it share with you when it's in pain? You have to earn the right for someone to be vulnerable with you. A broken heart does not share its joy or its pain with somebody that they do not know. Verse 11. The house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent, that seems a whole lot less sturdy than a house, right? But the tent of the upright is the one that will flourish. Even though the house of the wicked seems sturdier, it's the tent of the righteous that will outlast it, because that's the one being supported by God. Verse 12. There is a way that seems upright to a man, but its way or its end is the way of death. What did we already see? The way of a fool is upright, is good in their own mind. You can't tell them anything. Yeah, they think, no, this is totally the path. This is the way we should go. But instead, the smartest person who ever lived outside of Jesus told us to do what in Proverbs chapter 3? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Instead, in all your ways, acknowledge him. He will make your path straight. This same instruction is throughout the Old Testament. Jeremiah chapter 10, Psalm 119, but here's my favorite one, Isaiah 30:21. Isaiah 30:21. You shall hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk ye in it. Trust in him to guide your path. Psalm 32:8, God speaking to us says this, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I, the Lord, will guide you with my own eye. All right, we're going to stop there with chapter 12, and we will pick up with chapter 13 next time, looking at laughter, but someone putting on a brave face, and we'll keep charging through. Fantastic. We made a lot of headway today, so the pace is going good. Hopefully you guys are keeping up and